Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity here on ITSPmagazine. I am joined by the one and only, at least the one and only I know, Jason Haddix. How are you, Jason?
Doing well, Sean. How about yourself?
Doing great, man. Doing great. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you. I saw you in San Francisco a while back, and then I saw one of your posts on Twitter, I think it was, around LLM exploitation and an OWASP project, the infamous top 10, one of those projects that they put together.
Yep.
To which, let's be real, those projects, or the top 10 projects anyway, are for educational purposes, not necessarily a checklist, right?
Right.
Do these 10 and you're good.
Yeah.
But a way for people to understand and learn a bit. So we're going to talk through that and some other projects and tools that you're aware of, and the main purpose of my show is to kind of bring it all back to the business. How do we help companies operationalize the stuff that we teach them today?
Yeah,
enlighten
absolutely.
them on. So let's dig in. Of course, you and I know each other. You've been on the show before. You've been on other host shows. They've been on your show. So you've been around. A lot of people know you, but not everybody, I presume. So let's give folks a taste of who Jason is, what you're up to.
Sure. My name is Jason Haddix. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at a company called BuddoBot right now. Previously, I was the CISO for Ubisoft, the video game company, make Assassin's Creed and some games in the Rainbow Six series and other stuff. So I have a lot of security leader experience, but before that, for about 15 years, I was offensive security. So red teaming, bug bounty, web application testing, you name it, I hacked it. And so I was really ingrained in the offensive security scene. I still am today. I still do bug bounties in my free time. And my new company, BuddoBot, is a red team as a service company. So we do red teaming. So very plugged into attacking technologies. And one of the newer technologies that is here to stay is LLMs and ML and AI. And so we were chatting through email and talking about well, let's riff on that, because it's going to be a thing that businesses want to know more about, and definitely one of my interest areas. I have a couple Discord groups I'm part of that are really smart people in this scene, and we just talk all day about this kind of stuff. So I thought it'd be fun and come on here with you.
Yeah, I love it. I'm excited for this.
Yeah,
because I think a lot of, well, certainly mainstream media is kind of the big picture philosophical, is it's going to take over the world and we're all doomed, right?
Yeah.
And I see less and less as you get deeper into what does it do and where does it do it and how does it do it and who's managing what it does. And it gets a little less visibility in those areas. And thank goodness for the OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project group. They have tons of projects running. There's the OWASP Top 10, which is the main one that they're probably known for globally, which helps companies understand weaknesses in the software they're building and how it's often exploited. They update that I think every 3 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So there's this new project around LLMs, and there's a top 10. I'm sure there are more areas, but we're going to spend a few moments kind of walking through that. Then, do you want to maybe set the stage and tell people? I don't know. Is there something we need to cover first before we get into the 10? Like where you're seeing this being used? I can share our experiences, but I'd like to hear from you. Where
I mean the whole landscape is pretty new, right? And I mean, the first thing I like to tell people who are getting into research on security for LLMs or ML or AI is that it can seem very daunting at first because of just the topic names, right? Like you think it's very complex, but at the end of the day, it's mostly like it feels mostly like data science, which is not hard to grasp, right? I've known many people who are like, I'm not like smart enough to like research these things or understand, how to attack them or whatever. And so like, or like if you're in the security industry doing that type of research, and it's absolutely not the truth, right? If I can do it, anybody can do it. So, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, just diving into some of the projects we're going to talk about today. One of the ones we're going to talk about today is the top 10. And like you said, these lists are a mixture of vulnerabilities, concern areas. It's not exactly, it's not actually structured. Normally, like there has been a long debate in OWASP projects, the top 10 projects about like this isn't a controls list, right? This isn't an audit list, right? Like there are many more vulnerabilities outside of the scope of the top 10 lists of any type on OWASP. And there's many top 10s. There's the API top 10, the web top 10, the IoT top 10, you name it, there's a top 10. It's just to expose kind of, like things you should consider. And it's a mix of risks and vulnerabilities. So the OWASP top 10 one, just to preface, is an alpha draft right now. So it's just something that one person threw together who had a passion for this project. And that's how many OWASP projects start. It's one person's passion and they're like, hey, it's time for this topic to get exposed to OWASP. And so they'll put it into an OWASP page, which is a wiki, and then they'll call the community for feedback, which is what happened this week when you saw my tweet. And so there's a lot of people invested now. There's over 1,000 people in the Slack channel for this project, trying to refine it and figure out where we go with it, and if some of these things should be on the list. So it's very the Wild West right now. It's very fun to work in.
I
Yeah,
bet. I
yeah,
bet some of those conversations must be interesting.
yeah,
And
yeah.
do you, by chance, and we can look it up later, but by
Yeah.
chance, do you know who the passion project was?
Yeah, so it's Steve Wilson is
Okay.
the guy who put it up there.
Okay.
I believe he's from context security. Let's see here.
Contrast.
Contrast, yeah, contrast
Oh yeah.
security. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Cool. Well,
yeah,
we'll give him a shout out in the show notes for doing that
yeah,
work and getting it kicked off.
yeah.
Um, I, as I was kind of going through the list, a few of them were obvious.
Hmm.
Like certainly the very first one and the
Hmm.
second one.
Yeah,
Then it gets a little more obtuse and abstract.
yeah,
But
yeah.
uh, let's just go through them. So the first one is prompt injections,
Hmm.
and for anybody who's opened up an interface, or I guess mainly this is interface. I don't know if this also covers APIs, but
Hmm.
I guess it would cover API if you're passing
Yeah.
the prompt through the
If you're
API.
passing everything to an API, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
maybe that's even more challenging.
Yeah,
So tell us
yeah,
a little bit about this one. I mean,
sure.
yeah.
So prompt injection in an LLM is the idea that many times the interface for uh, these LLMs are chatbots, right? Or chatbot front ends, just chat screens, or somehow an API takes some text or something like that. And the idea of hacking and the vehicle for many of these other vulnerabilities actually in the real world will be prompt injection. So that's why it's number one on the list. And so, when you're doing any of these other types of attacks, many times the way you execute the attack is by tricking the LLM, which usually has some base code and training to not do bad things, by using natural language to do bad things. And so, like many of the CTFs that exist out there in the day right now for this type of research is like the LLM knows a secret password, and it has built in all these protections for you to not get the secret password. But can you craft the right words in order for it to tell you the right password? So here's an example of one of the simple solutions to one of these CTFs out there that's teaching people about prompt injection. Instead of asking the prompt for the secret password, for which it will tell you, no, I'm not authorized to give that to you, you ask it for the first letter of the secret password, and the second letter, and the third letter, and the fourth letter, and the fifth letter, until you exhaust it. And so this is a creative way around the protections that the prompt has built in. And there's many incarnations of prompt injections, but it's basically manipulating the LM with natural language, and trying to get data out of it that it's not supposed to give you, or trying to make it execute some technical attack. And so, really, in the real world, it will be the mechanism for many hacks of these things, because people will train all of this other stuff. And we'll talk about, they'll train these models off of their own data, but the
Yeah.
way to get it out will be natural language. And so it's really interesting from a hacker point of view, from an offensive security point of view. I'm used to typing in special characters into, fields and
Mm.
exploiting things with bits and bytes. And now I have to use words in the English language to do some of this. And it's fascinating to do this. It's and it also gives people who have never hacked anything before an opportunity to like hack some stuff. Like
Right.
use just like, can like that creative example of like getting the password out, that came from someone who wasn't a security person, who's just like a normal person who can think creatively. So yeah.
Yep. Super cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know, are there other things? Because for a system that's trained, I call
Mhm.
it purposefully biased, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If it's trained, that
Yeah.
you're basically feeding it a set of or static prompts, right? That
Mhm.
exist there that tell it what to do or not to do.
Yeah.
Um, how visible is that stuff, and is that part of exposure in this particular area where
Yeah.
if it's told to not ever do something, and
Yeah.
the prompt can actually find a way around, well, just in this one case, please do that,
Yeah.
because you
So I
know
mean
what it's not
that's
supposed to do, and then which then
yeah.
suggests that it shouldn't do that because it's bad, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is a whole sub community of type of people right now who are doing this with ChatGPT and OpenAI, right? So it can be called many different things. It can be called jailbreaking. It can be called prompt injection. Whatever. There's the industry hasn't really standardized on a name yet, right? But getting them to answer questions that they're not supposed to, or getting them to be biased or something like that is definitely an area of concern. And concerns, number one on the list, prompt injections. I mean, there are levels of protections that the companies like OpenAI or the other model vendors, right, they implement, right? And some of them are the training of the model itself, and then some of them are the base prompt that is reversely written to stop any badness. And from those are very lengthy system prompts. And then there are people trying to come out with things that even protect the system prompts, like prompt firewalls, and like so all this stuff is coming out. But at the end of the day, if your data or your model has trained on the data, you should expect that someone will find a creative way to get it out. At least right now, there aren't great solutions to just protect all of this stuff. So that's why I said some people are trying to, find solutions where you can bolt something on top, like a firewall, or like maybe an Oracle, like another AI that sits on top and filters out, all incoming, messages. Very similar to how we have in security today. We put stuff in front of stuff, and we do input validation. And so
Yep.
people are trying to come up with these technologies as we speak, to protect, I mean, because you want the training to be, verbose and large in these models, and to be able to answer the right questions, but you don't want them to answer the wrong questions or leak data from your system prompt, or leak configuration data of other things. And so, yeah, for sure, it's a area of concern, and like I said, still the Wild West. So
Yep. Yeah,
yeah,
sounds like it.
yeah,
And I'm curious, so forgive me if I'm staying on this too long, but I
no,
was thinking like things like memory keys. I don't know, how
mhm,
are those supposed to be private? And are there things, I don't know, that may be connected to something else down the
no,
line
no,
of the list, but
no worries.
um,
Yeah,
is a memory key supposed to be hidden,
yeah,
or is it supposed to be exposed?
yeah.
And can bad things happen either way?
Yeah, I mean, it totally can, right? So these AIs are, the chat interfaces, the APIs are all going to be running through cloud infrastructure, right? And many of them are going to have, what Chat GPT and OpenAI call plugins, right? So, no, they're all going to have capabilities, and so every different model is going to be different. It's not going to exist in a vacuum. So as soon as you start adding other technologies into the mix, like code interpretation, or you add the ability for uh, the model to use the internet as a data source, or you integrate some other platform, it introduces more complexity than just the base model. And you can start attacking the technical infrastructure. You can start attacking, if the model has been trained on private data, but it's only supposed to give you back an interpretation of that private data, you can filter out the data. You can try to steal the data. You can attack pretty much all parts of it, because the model's connected to everything. And so what a lot of people are trying to do right now is figure out ways to jailbreak out of, like Chat GPT's their code interpreter basically. And so that under the hood is a sandbox of a computer, right? And it's interpreting code, limited Python, and can you exploit that? And so a lot of us have at least gotten the base system information out. We can get like Etsy password out or something like that, but no one's rooted the jailbroken chat GPT code interpreter yet. So but yeah, I mean, those attacks are definitely possible. And so you really have to be conscious of when you hook up your AI, ML, LLM, whatever, to other things, you're introducing
Mm.
attack surface for
Yeah.
normal other types of attacks.
Yeah.
And yes,
All
for
those
memory too, is yes, it's absolutely a thing
for
that
the
people
memory
should think
key.
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
memory key. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I think we kind of bled over naturally, I suppose,
yeah, yeah,
into number two, which is the
mhm,
data leakage.
yep,
Um, I guess it depends what you're building it for.
yep,
If you're building it an enhanced search engine for stuff that's already public, eh,
mhm, yeah,
unless you don't want that manipulated and sending back
yep,
injecting stuff that you don't want presented to people. But
yeah,
maybe that's less of a leakage part, but more of a manipulation and a integrity piece. But
yeah,
what about integrity? And I know I wanted to talk about uh, how this connects to businesses today and how you see companies using it. So maybe this is a good
yeah,
place
yeah,
to talk about that, because I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges organizations will have is using this stuff and not putting their crown jewels
yeah.
somewhere that they don't want it to be.
So the data leakage one and the integrity and the privacy conversation can all fit in this kind of like number two conversation. And so you're right, training on the internet, presumably all the data on the internet and all these crawlers that are going out there to build this data set, um, shouldn't be that bad, but it still has privacy implications. Just because something's on the internet doesn't mean that it was supposed to be, or that it's okay for this particular bot or API or LLM that you're talking to expose it to someone else who didn't have explicit permission to use it. So there are privacy concerns with being able to query the data, or being able to query chat GPT to get your social or something, right? You didn't agree for that to be online, right? But some aggregator had it and put it online, and you would have had cause with them, but now everybody can grab it through chat GPT. And so people have done
Yep.
stuff like this before, asked for people's social address, phone number, and in some cases that the data's in there and they can trick something to give it up.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, people share stuff on social media.
yep, yep,
Uh, Financial transactions are a lot of them are public record,
yep,
purchases of homes, things
yep,
like that.
yep,
And yeah, individually, access to them on their own may or may not be a bad thing. Collectively,
hmm,
now with the natural language
yep,
and large language, the
yeah,
ability to ask a human driven question to say,
yep,
I'm really interested in this, can bring it all together with context
yeah.
and really put some stuff out there.
Yeah, in the world of offensive security, I think that this stuff will be crazy because with the ability to put together stuff, and when some of these LLMs train on OCR data and like image recognition data, you'll be able to ask like very private questions like, where does Sean walk his dog based on all of his public Facebook photos, right? And where is the studio for ITSP, like based on all of this information we've seen on Twitter. And right now, a skilled OSINT person can do that, but they have to be a practitioner of the art, right? But soon the LLM will be able to put all that together. So it's very interesting. It's going to be a crazy new world. And then we'll also have like disinformation, and deep fakes and stuff like that, which will become a big thing in the next few years. That technology, powered by AI and LLMs, and will be crazy. So, but yeah, so that's the public part, and there's a lot of concerns there.
Yep.
But the private part is what you and I were talking about businesses, right? And so what
Yes.
every
Yep.
business in the world right now is rushing to do is take all this proprietary data that if they're lucky enough to have collected into a data lake centrally and make more money off of it. That's what they're all thinking. They're like, sweet, I can use an LLM. I can even use just GPT on top of my data set and ask really intelligent questions to this data that I've never been able to do before, and it's going to make me money. And so all they see is these dollar signs, right? And they're like, okay, the way I make money is by offering a service. Well, I can ask my own data set stuff to run my business, but they can also ask their data set stuff to provide a service to the public, which is powered by an LLM. And so then they start building APIs. And so at least it's my opinion, and I'm friends with Daniel Miessler, and we talk about this stuff all the time. And it's our opinion that in a couple years there will be thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of APIs which have LLMs baked in to build their output, right? And so basically any type of API you're interfacing now will be a natural language API, in the future, and you'll be able to attack them with prompt injection and try to steal data from the company. And so there's layers of connectivity when they build these APIs that you're going to want to attack. And so Dan actually did a really excellent blog and graphic of what it'll look like in the future is that, the user will access this from their computer or their phone, an API of some sort, either through a website or a chatbot or an API that's connected to a front end of another app. But behind the scenes, after you pull out the veil, is just an API that's forwarding things to an LLM, and the LLM is pulling data from internally in the company. And so you don't want your internal whole data lake to exit out of your company, but you'll have a hard time in the future protecting all of that training data because you trained your model on it, and the LLM has access to it. And so how do you protect natural language from smuggling that out? And so yeah, it is a really interesting problem. Not only do you have the fact that your data that you internally trained the model on, that you've connected an LLM to, might be subject to theft, but you also, these companies are also going to connect all of that to other apps like Slack and Salesforce and all these internal tools that we have. They're going to have to connect it to get live data ingestion from, or to themselves query it. And they're going to make all these integrations for this system. And now you can attack apps like that through natural language, like through your integration. Can you send a Slack message to this person on the internal of Uber, or just use a fictitious company or a random company? But so there are a lot of avenues for attacking different stuff, in the data leakage section, when you look at how companies are going to implement LLMs and how they are going to go to market with LLMs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm picturing, I don't know how much private data is in this scenario, but something like an Etsy or something, where instead of searching for a jacket or a lamp or whatever it is that's top of mind, or let's use a jacket. Instead of that, searching for jacket, they could say, what are you in the mood for? What are you doing? What are you trying to, how do you feel? What's the environment like that you're going to be? Is it warm? Is it cold? And have a conversation with Etsy. And that, now granted, that's their data that's presumably all public anyway, but going back to the top 10, if there's other data in there, like pricing, or we talk about bots in terms of buying things that'll be collector's items to resell them for higher prices, buying things that are scraping prices to undercut competitors. So all this can be used nefariously, of course.
It can all be gamed. And so with the example of Etsy, it's you could attempt to pull out data about the earnings of the sellers. You could attempt to pull out data around private information of where the seller lives. That's not available on Etsy. Whatever that data lake would hold, normally. So I think about it in terms of SQL injection. I feel like the data leakage I'm after at the end of the day in this attack is very similar to what I would be after in the web world when we were looking at SQL injection, right? So what would I look at? Well, I'd look for the user's username and password. I'd look for their private information. I'd look for credit card information. I'd look for, anything that I consider be PII. That's what you're going to be doing now with, natural language and prompt injection and trying to leak out, data like that. And then there's the second layer too. How can I attack the organization through the LLM?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, it's clear we could talk for hours on each of these points. Let's go to the next one. I think it kind of maybe touches on the idea that there is sandboxing, because the number 3 is inadequate sandboxing.
Yep.
So that I guess there's an assumption there, thankfully, that people do sandbox this stuff. And that kind of goes to my point. How do you see, where does this stuff live in the environment, and what's quote unquote inadequate at that point?
Yeah, I mean, the sandbox has to be pretty stringent for most of these interfaces to isolate, kind of the LLMs. But like I said, the plugin architecture that that we're used to right now that comes through ChatGPT and other models, other models verbatim have some of these features built into them, these integrations. It becomes harder and harder to sandbox and integrate, stuff. Like as you add complexity to a system, more vulnerabilities and more avenues for attack come up. This has always been the way security has worked. And so, you can attempt to, attack this little Docker machine that your code interpreter is running on. And, you might not be able to get much out of that because it is well locked down for, it's just a Linux instance, right? So, but you also will, have other things that are connected to that it can call it to the internet and stuff. So a lot of this inadequate sandboxing is Linux hardening and integration work, basically. And how well do you do that? Well, OpenAI does it really well right now. No one's broken that, as far as I know, currently. Maybe it's come through their bug bounty at some point, but other models, will come out that are not OpenAI, and they will not have the security, rigor, and they will allow exploitation and pivoting through the LLM. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting. So,
yeah,
I mean, at this point, we've talked about kind of where to put it and how to kind of isolate it from stuff.
hmm
Um, the next two, at least I got, yeah, the next two are less about data manipulation, but manipulating
hmm
the machine itself,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah,
unauthorized code execution and server-side request forgery,
yep,
to me, says I'm not just going to ask you for data and try to get data from you, but I'm going to tell you to do something differently. I'm
yeah,
going to tell you to open up to a knowledge base that you shouldn't have access to, or I'm going to tell you to put malicious links in every response that you deliver back to the user. Or I'm making stuff up here. So
yeah.
talk to me about those two. I'm assuming they're good to connect together.
Yeah, so 4 and 5 are both very traditional in the security world, right? So the 4 is unauthorized code execution, and 5 is server-side request forgery. So unauthorized code execution is just, instead of attacking the data, I'm going to attack the machine that the chatbot's on, which is some machine in the cloud, and try to get it to exploit some Python code that roots itself, and now I have full control over that machine, that box, basically. And so if I can control that box, now I control everybody's session on that box, and I can attack everyone else, or I can do all kinds of nefarious stuff if I control the underlying computer that's the LLM is connected to. So
Okay, so this is
yeah,
behind the machine. This is the
yeah,
system
it's a
hosting.
system hosting. Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was a little more science fiction in my
No, 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 it's
understanding of
fine.
it.
I mean, what you said wasn't wrong. And obviously, all of this is open to interpretation.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of connected pieces, but this is my interpretation of this, is attacking the box that it's running on,
cool.
for that. And then SSRF, server-side request forgery, is a web vulnerability that we're very used to, of where normally a piece of a web application or API is meant to forward you somewhere or grab a file from somewhere, whatever. And instead of asking it to do what it's normally meant to do, retrieve one file, retrieve something from an API, you ask it to request a different resource. And so most often SSRF vulnerabilities in the real world, you look at a web application and it's supposed to parse some link. It's supposed to take like a URL and do something with it. And that's legitimate uses of the application. But instead, you ask it to look up its IP for the AWS internal metadata secret key. And that's the quintessential example. And once you get that key, you can log into their Amazon, basically, or their AWS, basically. And so this idea is using the LLM to request other sites. So you could force, the computer that's running the LLM to start reaching out verbosely to all these sites. So you could use it as a bot. You could ask it to, like we've talked about already, request internal resources or APIs or data stores that it has access to. So, this type of pivoting vulnerability is very prevalent in the web world, and also now becomes prevalent, with this thing that's attached to both the internet and the internal through, usually an API, but powered by
Yeah,
an LLM. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's very cool. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
The next one, I think one might be able to extract from stuff they hear in the general mass media
Hmm.
talks about this over-reliance on the machine generated content, right?
Yeah.
Now, hallucination comes to mind here. I don't know if it
Yeah.
goes beyond that,
Yeah.
or is it more nefarious in that you're being fed stuff because it's
Yeah.
been compromised, or both?
Yeah, I mean, this one's more. I mean, so these are kind of the ones that are in the Slack community for the LLM top 10 are being, very debated, right? This is a
Yeah,
risk, and it's a
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
risk
Makes sense.
introduced by people's interpretation of these bots, right? Um, so this one is saying, hey, LLMs generate content. They do their best in what they're trained on, and as well as how they work to present data. But people, haven't, people have a over reliance when they're having a conversation with something like this to consider it an oracle and in a factual way, right? And so, like sometimes, the biggest illustration I give to people is like, okay, so you really like using ChatGPT, and you start to use it a lot in your day to day, and you start to want to ask it very um, the questions that you deem useful for whatever your purposes are. And so you're getting some good output and you're like, great. And I tell them, ask ChatGPT a couple times the same question. Ask it 4 or 5 times and see how different each answer it comes back. And so you have to understand that, you taking in the information from the LLM also have to be an arbiter, also have to understand that this is, sometimes it hallucinates, sometimes it says, like if I ask it who I am, it has some data on me, up to the cutoff point, when I'm using ChatGPT, but it also confuses me with Dave Kennedy and Ed Scotus and like all these other people who are in the information security scene, and they'll like mix up our bios and stuff like that. Or
Not,
Dan Miesler,
not
right?
bad,
So
not bad confusions, by the way.
no, 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 no. I'm
They're
I'm
all cool
happy. Yeah,
guys.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All cool guys. Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting to to illustrate that to people. And so this is more of like, the category in the top 10 is more on, hey, people need to realize there needs to be training and encouragement around the fact that, like you can use this as a tool, but it is still just a tool. Um, and and this is where we, like we will get into, like a lot of trouble with like generated news and, topics and stuff like that. Like you'll really have to, as a human, add like a information like scrutiny to a lot of stuff that's automatically generated. So yeah.
Now, so how does that relate to the next one? Inadequate AI alignment. So it talks about objectives. What do you're trying to accomplish something and it doesn't quite do that or get you there. This sounds more
Yeah.
like kind of like the last one, a bit of risk. Is this less human based and more system based? So you get a response, then you're using that down the chain in the workflow unchecked, or what is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very much based on, like, well, let's say there's an API that someone builds that is based on health information. Like one of the big insurance companies makes an API to help you answer questions, and replace all of their help desk, right? Like, their insurance help desk or their, medical help desk or whatever. And so they're using this new API they built powered by an LLM. And the base programming of the LLM in the system, the base system prompt is supposed to say, like you're only supposed to be helpful, you're only supposed to retrieve accurate information that we have this data on, but you can suggest to people courses of action or ways to do X, Y, and Z based on health information, which, we will see, but it's going to be scary. So, there are ways to tune like these LLMs, but what if you're talking with that and instead of, being able to get it to tell you what medications you should seek, or what things you should ask your doctor, you're able to tell that bot, okay, well, how would I, do something harmful, right? Like how would I, like mix these medications to get outcomes that, are not above board, or like you start asking it questions that moral, bot would not be programmed to do. So these are ways to, you know basically give, ask it for information. Like, one of the big things that people are trying to do right now with the models that exist today is get the bots to do stuff like this so that we can train them better and understand what questions give these poorly defined outcomes. And so like one of the things is I'm part of the AI village at DEF CON, and we're doing a giant challenge on all of the big LLM vendors where we're going to have them there and people can walk through at DEF CON and basically use real language to try to get them to do things that they're not supposed to do or get them to be misaligned. And so this will be, kind of in this area. And a lot of people will ask the bots questions to try to get them to be biased, to be racist, to be sexist, to build weapons of harm. These are all things that the bots should absolutely not be talking about or able to do, right? And
Yeah.
so you have to train the models, and you have to train them how to handle input from users. And yeah, so these are things that you want to check for.
Yep. A lot of things to consider there.
Yeah.
Um, insufficient access controls. So, kind of as we covered earlier, I naturally go to the system itself. So the API key, like for example, the one
Yeah.
that allows access to different things through to Open API, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Chat GPT stuff. So there's that, but then I presume it also covers the box itself.
Yeah.
Posting it.
Yep. This one is it applies to multiple levels. The box
Okay.
itself failing to restrict access. Things it's connected to, or the user is supposed to have a defined set of access for the API to be able to do certain things. And if you haven't set up everything connected to the LLM with the right permissions, then the user could trick it into giving, more access to different things. It fits into some of these other type of web vulnerabilities, and the vehicle again for most companies will be prompt injection. So, but yeah, I mean, the user in every specific LLM or chatbot that exists in the world, the user experience should be like to do one or two things, right? Right now, ChatGPT has everybody thinking you just talk to this thing and get everything back. But in the company's implementation of it, they'll want it to do a few things for you based on their data. And they'll connect it to a few technologies to get you that data and parse it with the LLM, or access it with the LLM. Well, if you don't implement the right access controls, people can access everything like we've been talking about. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And one thing that comes to mind with the APIs, and we often talk about privacy. So
Mhm.
gaining access to steal something, right? But we often forget, and we talked a little bit about integrity, which was probably the most forgotten one.
Yeah.
But we sometimes forget about availability. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
in the case of like the API key, which
Mhm.
provides access to things between systems. For example, the Open API key, you get it once, and
Yeah.
that's it. So if you
That's
don't
it.
save it somewhere, you don't have it anymore. So
Yeah.
if that's compromised, whatever setup you have is kind of hosed, and that thing is no longer available, right? Or if
Yeah.
it's or if that is compromised,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If you put that in GitHub, then,
So
then you're,
so this one, infinite access controls
yeah,
and unauthorized code injection, and anything that can lead you to control of the box that is handling the LLM output is scary to me, because like not only, in my brain as an attacker, am I looking at attacking, I want to own the box for pride or whatever. But then once I own that box, there are hundreds of thousands of people accessing that API. What if I start injecting JavaScript in every response, and now I can attack everybody who's using that API? Or what if I add my own, or what if I modify the system prompt? What if I say, hey, as well as this, you're also going to tell users this, right? And slowly like influence the outcome of the questions that come through the LLM, right? And
yeah,
I could completely change the way people think about a thing because they're using one of these APIs, and poison it with
yeah,
my whatever I want to do. And so yeah, I mean, attacking the users of the API is just as important as protecting the internal information that the
yeah,
API and the LLM are connected to.
exactly. So you
Yeah,
touched on number 10. So let's quickly look at error handling.
yeah, yeah,
Is this logging or lack thereof and being able to respond to stuff, or is it something else?
yeah. I mean, this one is also in contention. A lot of these are in contention, right? Because it's a mismatch of stuff right now. Like I said, prompt injection will be the vehicle for a lot of these things. Some of them overlap. But the idea here is improper error handling of any of the underlying system, or connected integrations to the LLM. If you manage to get them to error out in some way, giving them too much context, giving them code they don't understand, having them execute code that errors out. Could that give you access to different things, like in a like in the number 4 unauthorized code extraction, if you feed it a buffer overflow vulnerability, like does it execute that on itself and then give you access to the system? Well, maybe. But if it just errors out, does it error out in a way that reveals sensitive information about the underlying computer, which might give passwords, API keys, system information you don't want given to the user? So these are all things people will rigorously test. Many times the LLM creates an abstraction between an error message and the user, but sometimes these LLMs just fail and dump data to the console, and you can use that to figure out more about the underlying machine, and there could be attack vectors there basically. Yeah.
And if folks haven't played with this stuff yet, they may or may not realize that the interface for ChatGPT is free.
Mhm.
But if you want to start doing things with it through the API, it costs money.
It does, yeah.
And misuse of this thing could eat up some cash pretty quickly. If
Oh yeah.
especially I bring it up here in the error handling, is if you're not watching your logs and
Oh yeah.
activity and your costs, you might be surprised.
Yeah,
You might be
absolutely, for
surprised.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that covers the 10, which I mean was really cool. We're at 40 minutes here, but I
Yeah.
feel a few more points, because we talked about Atlas and
Yep.
some other CTF type tools,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so maybe highlight some of those things quickly for us
Yeah.
to kind of round out things.
Sure. So I brought 3 resources, that I think that, like, if you bring it back to the real world, what do you want to be like looking at as a business or a practitioner, right? And so if you're a practitioner or business, another project you can look at on top of this new alpha OWASP top 10 is MITRE Atlas. So MITRE runs a whole bunch of security projects. And, one that people are very familiar with is MITRE Attack Framework, right, in the industry. The other one is that they have right now is MITRE Atlas, which is the adversarial threat landscape for artificial intelligence systems. So that's what Atlas stands for. And it maps out attacks on ML and AI. And so although these are, larger sets of, attacks, there's a lot of good information there to learn about these things. And they have some published attacks here. So like when you get into like data poisoning and like how that happens, well, they'll link you to Microsoft Swift API and the instance of how that was poisoned and started doing bad stuff. And so they'll show they'll link back to both a description of some of these vulnerabilities, and they categorize it a little bit differently, but it is a good resource to look at. So MITRE Atlas is one. The other one
Cool.
is a blog by Daniel Miessler, and it is called the AI Attack Surface Map version 1.0. It's on his blog, danielmiessler.com. And so what Dan did is he's a real future thinker, and we talk all the time. And so what he did is he outlined what the future is going to look like that I've been talking about, where how users will access APIs that are powered by LLMs and what they're connected to. And then he wrote down the attack surface for each area in that model. Which is kind of the first time I've seen this done. It's the best way I've seen it done so far. He has a visualization for it and a whole blog around it. So I would suggest reading that. It's really, really good. The AI Attack Surface Map 1.0. And then the last one is like, just if you want to get, if you're just a, a practitioner and you want to get used to prompt injection, there have been a couple of prompt injection CTFs. One of the ones that's still up that you can play with is called Gandalf, and it's gandalf.lakera.ai, lakera.ai. And it is that CTF it has 7 levels, and you have to bypass this wizard who's blocking a password, and you ask it natural language questions. And this will give you a feeling for what prompt injection really looks like and how to do it. And this is a really good intro for people to understand prompt injection and some of that stuff. So those are the resources that you can get started with. But if you're a business and you're looking at implementing, I check out the attack surface map. I would also follow Dan because he's talking about defensive measures and oracles and firewalls that we'll put in front of this stuff. And he's really he has a AI security daily tweet he puts out every day. So I would follow Dan and kind of what he's doing there. And then like several of one of the things that we didn't talk about is how did the security industry, parse all of
Mm,
this, and what's going to,
yep.
happen with the security industry when LLMs are a core piece of the technology. And it's crazy. It's, in my opinion, next year and the year after, when we go to RSA and meet up again, we see each other again, it's going to look much, much different, because the one thing LLMs do very, very well is parse massive amounts of data very quickly, and give you context that you didn't have before. So if we can limit the hallucination and ratchet down the settings for these LLMs, many of our security tools will be natural language tools, which will be very interesting,
Yep.
and you will have less abstraction in some of these areas. Like I'll give you one example I like to tell people, like
Yeah.
DLP right now. So DLP is about to be totally revolutionized, where these technologies we used to need a hardcore agent, and like it didn't do a very good job of classifying you know data sensitivity for anything leaving its rightful place. Now you will be able to use an LLM to read an entire document and tell you the sensitivity, nature, and exactly what that document should be classified as, with the right prompting and the right model. And you won't have to have an agent anymore. You can run it all through your network layer or your cloud layer, your data transfer layer. And so an industry that in my opinion was on its last legs because it wasn't doing super well will now be possible because of LLMs, basically. And
Yep.
so this will be the same thing with SOC tier one, same thing with like, some offensive security stuff. The world is going to look very different in security because of the power of these tools in the next coming years.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's super exciting. And
Yeah.
hopefully, because they're security companies, they're considering the first part of this conversation as they're doing those
Yeah.
implementations.
Yeah. You're hoping. Yeah. You're hoping a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I'm going to do a plug for you in the AI village. And I'm going to invite you now to bring the team back as we get closer to DEF CON to give us a deeper insight into look inside to what's going on at the AI village that week. But uh, I think it's another fantastic place to come together with people who are also interested in this,
Yeah.
right? And are exploring. No, a lot of people know a lot of things. Nobody knows everything, and
Nope.
together we kind of learn and raise the bar
Yeah.
across the board.
Yeah.
And the villages overall are perfect for that. And
The villages are great. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so the AI village is a great place to meet in person
Yeah.
and to see things in real life and check out what's really going on. So
Yep.
a plug there. I'll include a link to the village too, so
Perfect.
folks can follow that.
Yeah. We'll have live stuff, and we'll have the talks in the village. It's one
Yeah,
of the biggest spaces that the AI village has had. So there'll be lots to do for sure.
love it.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that chat, and
Yeah.
we'll get an update on the state of the state of LLM NLM
Yeah.
security at that time when we chat again.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, this has been super insightful for me. I hope I'm certain people listening are thinking very differently now about just throwing something up on their sites and or in their organizations and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
thanks to the team at OWASP for making this happen. And yep. So we'll include lots of links for everybody to continue learning, and of course your profile, Jason. So folks who want to reach out to you, they can try to connect with
Awesome. Sounds good.
you. Right on. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Of course, if you enjoyed it, share it with your friends, family, peers, foes, whomever, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again, Jason.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.